Good morning. Today is Thursday, December 4th, 2025. I would like to call this special meeting of the Board of Education Policy Committee to order. The next special meeting of the Board of Education Policy Committee is on Thursday, March 5th at 8 a.m. For the election of the committee chair, may I have nominations for chair, or actually I'm going to nominate Dennis Maroney as chair of the Policy Committee. Is there a second? Bill. Are there any other nominations? There are no other nominations. All those in favor of electing Dennis Maroney for the position of chair of the Policy Committee, please indicate by raising your hand. That is unanimous. Dennis Maroney is elected as chair of the Policy Committee. Congratulations, Dennis.
Thank you very much. You all for your support.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So moving on to our agenda, our first, we have a bunch of policies to go through. Our first one is Board of Education Policy 6950, policy regarding library collection, development and maintenance. I guess I could throw that to Jessica or Marge.
I just wanted to give context. We are through with the policy audit. We've been through all of the existing policies once. So the policies for today are either changes in the law or new policies. And Jessica, I'm going to defer to Jessica on the library policy.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So the library policy is a policy that comes from a statute that was passed in this most recent legislative session. As you probably all know, maybe some of you who are new to the committee don't know, Shipman and Goodwin has a model policy service that you all subscribe to. And the philosophy of our model policies is that we create policies that are either required by statute or that we recommend for best practice. This is a policy that is required by statute, the statute that the Public Act specifically requires that all boards of education adopt. They actually call it 3 policies, but we put together an omnibus policy combining all 3 recommended or required policies. So we developed a policy that comes directly from the statute. If you read the Public Act, you won't see it's lifted line for line. And that's simply because the statute itself is, for lack of a better explanation, it's not very clearly written. It's repetitive. There are a number of provisions in there that apply to all 3 policies. So we combined them, we kind of sliced and diced the language to capture everything that's required, but in a way that is more reader friendly. So there's really nothing in our model policy that does not come directly from the statute, which means that boards of education don't really have any discretion to change the requirements in the statute. Somebody might have written it differently. They might have put things in different places, but the language itself comes from the statute. And I'll just stop there to see if there are any questions.
Dave?
So what happens if we don't adopt it?
So couple things. Why do you have to follow the law? Number one, the superintendent has to certify under a form every year that the district is in compliance with all state statutes. And so if he falsely certifies that, then he's at risk of losing his superintendent's license, among other things. Number two, Section 10(4)A of the Connecticut General Statutes identifies the educational interests of the state. Boards of education are required to implement the educational interests of the state, and one of the educational interests of the state is Connecticut state statutes. So if you don't implement Connecticut law, then you have not implemented the educational interests of the state. What does that mean? That means that the Connecticut State Department of Education or any complainant could file a complaint under Section 10(4)B, arguing that the Board of Education has failed to implement the educational interests of the state. There would be an investigative process forcing you to come into compliance. If you did not come into compliance, they could take it to the Superior Court. The last reason why you have to adopt it is that there's a liability issue. So here, I'm not quite sure how to articulate what harm might result if you don't adopt a library policy, probably emotional harm, or somebody could make any argument about, what harm could result. But if you don't adopt a required policy and harm results, then the board could be liable for having failed to adopt the required policy.
Bill?
Why are you doing? Thanks, Bill.
So I read through our policy carefully and I see where we start out with should the library materials should represent a wide range of varied and diverging viewpoints in the collection as a whole. And in the following paragraph mentions educational needs of the student and based on grade level. So my question would be, do we need to be specific or should we in the policy address, for example, sexually explicit material is banned grades 5 and below in our elementary schools? Would that be appropriate and meet the grade level? Do we have the authority to do that under the statute?
So what I would say is those types of issues would be addressed in the appendix to the policy. So under this policy requires that the board delegate responsibility to the superintendent to establish a procedure by which a certified school library specialist will continually review library and other educational material within the library using professionally accepted standards. You are working to develop that procedure, but those types of nitty-gritty details would be appropriate to include in that procedure. I would not recommend putting it in the policy. First of all, because the policy, as I said, really comes directly from the statute. And second of all, I think that procedure requires flexibility to be developed and updated as appropriate by the appropriate professionals.
I don't disagree with that on purely academic materials, which will lead into my second point. So you're saying that we're not free to add to the policy? Is a policy, in my view, I would think it's a minimum floor to meet, and that we are free to put our imprimatur on it?
It's, I have to look at the language of the Public Act to see if it says shall adopt a policy that says the following things. The question would be, is it additive or is it modifying the language of the statute? So for any change that you might consider, we would have to carefully analyze whether it changes the fundamental meaning of the statute or whether it adds to it, or whether it takes away from it. So the answer to your question is maybe.
Okay.
But furthermore, the other point I want to make is that in general, our philosophy about policies is that they should stick as closely to the statutory language as possible, and should delegate appropriately discretion to the administration to comply with the language and spirit of the policy, but to operationalize it and implement it. And that administrative flexibility allows for the implementation of the policy to evolve with the times and the professional standards.
I understand that. I'm just honing in on grade level appropriate and whether it's within our purview to explicitly define what grade level appropriate should be for our district. But I take your point and
Yeah.
I don't want to belabor it. The other question I had was, and maybe this goes to legitimate pedagogical purposes is mentioned in the policy. And I fully agree with that. And I think that question should be asked before or guide us as we build out our library system. And just in general, I just wanted to state more specifically that I think we should look at it as, does the material support the curriculum? And what are we trying to impart to our students? Somehow weaving that in the policy. And I don't have a fully formed thought on that other than I would like to see the curriculum drive a lot of the process.
I think, so all those questions are really good questions, and they all really do relate to the library review procedure as defined on page 2 of the policy.
I just didn't want to, I don't mean to cut you, and
No,
I
please.
just didn't want to get I don't want us to get caught on the back foot
Mhm.
with a policy in terms of, I don't want to have to be defending on review procedure if we can get ahead of it and say, hey, in elementary school, sexually explicit materials are not appropriate. Or if we bring a book into our system or any instructional materials, whatever, do they support the curriculum that the superintendent and his staff have developed? More from that perspective, instead of trying to get caught in the back foot and defend or go through a contentious procedure, if we could get ahead of it. That's my basic point.
Right. I agree with that. I do think that that belongs in Appendix A rather than in the policy. And I think your administration is working on a procedure to develop the specifics of Appendix A, and maybe at a later date, they can share with you that or now.
Yeah, yes. So Tim McGuire, the Director of Instructional Technology, is leading that committee with library media specialists from multiple levels, additional faculty members, and also one of the library media specialists from the Darien Public Library. He's also reached out to the State Library Association and to the Connecticut Association of Schools to see if they have any guidance. So it's an inclusive process.
Why is the Darien Public Library librarian involved? As a
Because
consultant?
Right, we wanted to make it as inclusive as possible and get multiple points of view from people with expertise in curating a selection. Collection.
Okay. I would, because I would look to you and the rest of the staff as our in-house experts, but I will defer to the judgment of the professional staff.
Joanna.
Thank you. So this might the answer might be maybe, it might go along to what you were saying earlier. But one thing I noticed about this is that the idea of individuals with a vested interest, it seems very vague. Who decides who has a vested interest, who doesn't. But more importantly, in our policy 6220, the challenges to instructional materials, we specify that the person who's challenging, if they are not staff or students, that they need to be related to a student in the same grade level building. And I was wondering why that was not applied here.
So actually, individual with a vested interest is defined in the statute and it's in the policy. It's defined as any school staff member employed by the board, the parent or guardian of a student currently enrolled in a school operated by the board at this time, a request for reconsideration is filed, and any student currently enrolled in a school operated by the board at the time, a request for reconsideration is filed. And if that definition is in the policy, so whenever you see that term, it relates to that definition.
Jessica, just one comment on that. It says a parent or guardian of a student in a school, but it does not say a parent or guardian of a student in the specific school or grade where the book might or curriculum material might be. And our current procedure does say it's the specific school, which I think is more appropriate because you might have a high school parent or an elementary school parent saying that something doesn't belong in a high school library. And that really was the point, that this doesn't actually talk about.
Yeah, it's a good point. I put this in the category of this is what the legislature has given us, right? And I don't believe that we have the power to modify that because that comes directly from the statute.
Even in our appendix or procedures to implement it operationally?
Correct.
I just the clarifying question, sorry, about this policy as well. And at the end, it says, if the individual with a vested interest, doesn't like the decision and appeals it, he appeals to the board. I'm wondering if the board is deciding the merits of the argument or if they're just making sure that that policy has been properly followed.
Really good question. The latter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dave?
Yeah, so I know we have this on, this is just a first read today, right? And it seems like we're gonna have some questions. Seems like we have some other policies and amendments and things that are out there that'll guide our decision here. The reason I asked the first question I asked is it seems like we really don't have a decision here. We have to take it or leave it, which kind of gets weird. Like, why are we even here? Why are we even voting? What's the purpose of having a board if the state can just jam stuff down our throat? So, you know, not sure how much we're gonna get to in detail. Just a nitpicky point, you said employees of the board. That I think, to my knowledge, we have one, doesn't include teachers, that's employees of the district. So I'm not sure about the drafting there. So I guess my question is, what's the process here, Dennis? How are we thinking of working through this? Because there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot on our plate. There's a lot to go through. We're gonna have a lot of questions. Just how are we gonna work with the board in full, and how are we gonna work as a subcommittee to get this addressed? Because it seems like our chances of getting this done today are not great.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think we're gonna have to well, let's continue to work through this a little bit more, and
Okay.
then we'll see where we are and we can decide. But I think we may have to go back and because I have a question on, I have two big questions. One, and Joanna kind of brought it up with our policy. Well, first off, I guess my first question is, how do you define library versus curriculum? And what is there a difference between those?
Library versus curriculum.
So is a book found in a library different than a book that's found in a classroom?
Yes,
Yes.
yes. This speaks only to the books found in, actually, if you look at the definition of library and other educational material in the statute, it means any material belonging to, on loan to, or otherwise in the custody of a district, school, library, media center.
Okay. So then I guess the question, and Joanna was raising it, our policy on classroom books doesn't seem to follow the same policy here. So are we in what's the word? Contrast or
Conflict,
sorry,
the conflicting.
conflicting,
I
that's the
would
word.
view the materials in the classroom as being part of the curriculum policy of challenging materials that are in the classroom.
Okay, so we can have conflicting or differing policies between the two.
You can, yes, this pertains only to library material.
Okay.
I mean, you could argue that definition of library with library media center, as it's written in there, I believe you said. I mean, we don't have a library media center, so this doesn't apply to us. We have libraries. Like, I mean, it's poorly written.
Our libraries are considered library media centers.
But we don't have a library media center. We have multiple, so does
Multiples
apply.
across the state.
Right, doesn't say any. So. Does that include if we have a library section, if somebody has a bookshelf within the classroom, is that encompassed or is that separate? I don't know.
Well, that's what I was just saying to Dennis. I see the classroom materials as classroom materials or curriculum materials, not as a library.
I would agree with that, yeah.
So going back to your point, Dave, I think there's important parts that I think sounds like the committee may want to see in appendices. And do we want to wait until we have those before we present this to the board?
I mean, if there's a policy being developed, it would make sense to me. We wait until we have the guidance coming from Tim and we get that back and we see how that's drafted before we could move forward. It's kind of hard to move forward with language on this one until you see that fully mapped out. That would be my thought.
I would tend to agree, but
Yeah, I'd like to see the appendix.
so, okay,
Just it'll be ready by March.
okay. So can we punt on this or do we need to adopt this immediately? Or,
What I'll say is that there are many policies that are required that boards take their time to
Okay.
adopt. So I can't advise you that you should punt, but it happens.
okay, so I think we may table this one for a while. Our next policy is policy 4250, employment and student teacher checks. Student and teacher checks. Student teacher checks. March, sorry.
Again, these are legal updates that happened in the policy memo. It talks about a determination by DCF that has been overturned and that should not be used in an employment decision. I don't know, Jessica probably, she's actually the partner who's in charge of the policy committee at Shipman and Goodwin, so she may have some more color on that as well.
This one is not very significant. It's just cleaning up based upon changes that the General Assembly made every year, just so you understand our process, every year we review the legislative changes and the legislative changes that affect education policy and law. Then we go through our model policies to see if any updates are required based on those changes, and we push out all those updates. So a lot of these are really in the nature of cleaning up our existing policies to make sure that they're updated in accordance with the latest versions of the law. And I would put this in that category.
Yeah.
Any questions on this one? No. Okay. So do we want to recommend, we'll bring this to the board and approve that?
I was going to even go so far as to recommend, maybe some of these on the next board meeting could be considered part of the consent agenda, since they're routine housekeeping type issues.
Okay,
And I read through them, all of them, and I didn't have any issues with
I agree.
those types.
Just Dennis, I think it would be the first read though, when it's presented to the board, so the vote would not be on Tuesday. It would
Okay,
be the
that's fine.
first reading
But
and
this just
discussion.
present is just more my, to get it off our plate and then we're done. So, okay, our next policy is 4450, policy regarding employees in section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990.
This is again cleaning up. I think it's the Title IX policy that requires that you have similar appeals process. So we're cleaning up the 504 policy to be in line. So really just technical changes.
Okay. Any questions on this one? Maybe we can do this. I mean, I kind of felt the same way as Bill. The rest of these are all fairly, well, except for the last one for me. Fairly simple, but we can go through them again. Policy 5010, admission to the public schools at or before age 5.
So this has been a law for a while. And so we developed administrative regulations about the assessment that's used to determine whether a child can enter earlier than the statute. We also included some guidance on students from other districts and where they should be placed as far as grade level. It's just nice to give parents notice of what they can expect. There are always exceptions to the rules, but it's helpful to everyone to have some expectations.
Questions on this? No. Policy 5125, students in section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act.
That's the same as the
Sorry, I
one.
did that one.
Yeah.
5200, homeless students and youth.
Again, the changes are technical and it's just really cleaning up what the legislature did.
Okay. And then 5300, students' use of the district computer system and internet safety.
So we postponed proposing this policy until we had guidelines in place for students and teachers about artificial intelligence. And so that's why you're seeing it now, because we do have those guidelines in place.
Joanna.
The one thing I noticed in this is that besides the AI stuff, it points out specifically that if a student is using social media in the building, that it's prohibited. And I think we just maybe had that blocked. I remember I used to be able to even walk in here.
On our network.
Yeah.
But students can still on their own.
Like if they have
network.
a VPN, it's
Yeah.
okay. So if a student is, because social media is pretty hard to turn down when you're a teenager. What happens if a student is found using social media in the building?
It would go according to the disciplinary code. So they would probably be, most likely be on a cell phone. And there is a progressive discipline policy, practice that
Okay.
goes in place with the cell phone.
And do the students know?
And it
that-
depends on what they're doing in social media. So you could have a student that does something that's illegal, that becomes a police matter
Right.
by use of social media. And that could end up as a Title IX investigation or a sexual harassment investigation. It's really dependent on what the content is and the impact on the school environment.
Okay, so do the students I know they do, probably when they talked about the new cell phone policy, they also went over all of this, but I just wanted to double check that they understand what the implications are.
They do. They're shared. That's all shared in the beginning of the year.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this? Policies 1300, 4111, 5710, non-discrimination, community personnel and students. Another revision.
So again, there were changes in the law to include sexual assault victims and human trafficking victims as protected classes. And so the policy was revised.
Questions? No. And our last policy, 1400, policy regarding signs, symbols, flags, and advertising on school property.
So I think I'll defer to Dr.
Yeah,
Boyle on
this came as a result of earlier in the school year, groups from inside and outside of Darien placing signs on school property, and the practice has been not to, so different organizations, businesses, and just codifying it in a policy so that it's clear that the only signage that can be on school property are signs related to school programs.
Any questions on this? Looks like you have one.
I'm just catching up.
No,
with
it's
you.
fine.
Yeah.
Dennis?
Joanne, sorry.
Yeah, so when you say related to school, that means like student clubs, students can put up things, staff can put up things, just
Yeah.
no more putting up like
Well,
the,
staff can put if they're related, if they're school organizations.
okay, so, but I know like a lot of times in the past, other, like preschools have a family fun day, and they would put their signs up as well.
Yeah, those have historically been taken down
Okay.
according to the principals. They're the YMCA. They can be at the entrance of the schools off of the property, but because if you start to allow one organization, you have to allow all organizations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I took this, at least the materials in the packet pertain more to commercial advertising. Like say at the Turkey Bowl, we play a game and what we can monetize from allowing advertising on our fences and so forth. Because then the rest of it, that's really the only subparagraph I see here is commercial advertising and posting signs with written permission, and then it just goes into a service provider agreement we have with the Booster Club. The only thing that gave me pause on that was, and I do see we have leeway here. There were just some enumerated rights, constitutionally enumerated rights that we have decided not to allow. And for example, by entities engaged in business or conduct involving blah, 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 religion. And my only, I just have a pause. I don't really have, I just wanted to get it out there. Like what if a local church or synagogue comes in and says, we just want to put up we'll pay you, we'll put up a banner at the Turkey Bowl. Come join us for Shabbat on Friday or Easter services on Sunday. We would not allow that under our policies. That's all I wanted to say. That just gives me a little bit of pause and I'll just keep an eye. Thank you.
Dave?
So we view this in that light as a time, place, and manner restriction?
Yes, well, what part, all of it is that.
Right.
It speaks to the First Amendment.
And then, Eric, you mentioned clubs, so is there not a bit of a, is that not a bit of a gap? So you could have pretty much any club, and because there's a club sponsoring it, you can post any message? I'm just curious to see how that would work in practice.
I'm not sure any message. Obviously, it has to fit with all of our other policies,
Okay,
but if it's a discriminatory message, it's not going to be allowed. But if it's a club from the town that's not affiliated with the school, they wouldn't be able to put a sign up.
got it. Okay, thank you.
We also had 4275. I
Yeah.
think.
I missed
don't
one?
think you
Sorry.
got them. So-
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that. 4275. Oh, 4275, Family and Medical Leave Act, repeal and replace.
So I think at the board retreat, Tom Mooney explained to all of you the changes in Connecticut law, which are a nightmare, but they're codified in the policy because they need to be, and we are following them now.
Question on that one? No, good. Okay. So do we have agreement of the committee that we can present all the policies except the first to the board for
For
review?
first reading.
First reading, yeah. Okay.
May I make one point?
Please.
The only thing I'll say about punting on the library policy is if somebody decides to challenge your library material, you are obligated to comply with the law. And I do want to point that out. And so, as I said, boards of education take time because they have to. You all are very busy to update their policies, but you still have to comply with the laws on the books if it comes to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And our last point is public comment.
We have no members of the public in the
Members of the
audience.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.